Hello folks, Scott here with the new My Monthly Hero August 2021 card kit. Lots of extras, lots of goodies, interesting fancy dies. Let's dig in and see what we've got in this kit. This is our 4x6-inch stamp set this month. All sentiments, it seems like. There's one heart here. Thank you for being you. You color my world. You're vibrant. I love you. All colors are beautiful. You color me happy. Your light shines through. You are the best. Strength lies in difference. Sending. I think the sending goes along with this love die. We've got two fancy dies in this kit. One cuts out the word love. All separate letters. And then we've got two hands that make little heart. Two hands in a heart shape. Two fancy dies. A 4x6-inch stamp set. And then lots of extras this month. We have this 5.5-inch cling stamp, this nice interlocking circles, nice rubber stamp that's about 5.5 inches. Great cling stamp. They are looking for us to color because they have given us some liquid watercolors. I don't have any liquid watercolors whatsoever. I'm really interested to play with these, see what liquid watercolor is all about. We've got indigo, pink, and dandelion. 3 liquid watercolors. I know Hero Arts has lots and lots of colors of liquid watercolor available in the store. Ooh, 3 full-size bottles, liquid watercolor. That's a lot of color. Then we get a 5 1/4 by 6.5 inch sun flare stencil. Really nice stencil here. Big enough to cover an A2 card with no problem. Of course, we also get watercolor paper. We've got 6 sheets of 8.5 by 5.5 inch watercolor paper. Nice, lightly textured watercolor paper. That's everything in our kit this month. Obviously, I think they want us to do some watercoloring. I'm always up for a challenge. Now, fortunately, the reverse side of our backer card has got this color swatch guide, a color mixing guide on the back, where they're taking a drop of pink and adding 1, 2, 3, 4 drops of dandelion. This is a great assist, especially for those of us who have not played with liquid watercolors before. Really glad that they included this as well. Let's break out the watercolor palette and make some cards. And here's my 10 cards for this month. I tell you, when I first looked at this kit, I thought, how in the world am I going to make 10 cards from this kit? But fortunately, the stamp set actually has 10 sentiments on it. So I figured I would try to make a card using each sentiment. Now, of course, I grabbed our little hand heart dies to play with first. I thought those were the most interesting. And first I was wondering about whether or not we were expected to watercolor our skin tones on watercolor paper and die cut that with those dies. But it turns out that Hero Arts released a new pack of Hero Hues cardstock along with this kit called Colors of Earth that has a lot of earth tones, a lot of browns and tans that are perfect for skin tones. I did not get the new Hero Hues cardstock, but I dug around in my stash and I did find this Tim Holtz Craft Core Nostalgic collection from Coordinations that actually has a lot of great browns and midtones and tans in it. So I figured I would use this to cut all of the hand heart dies this month. It also has some nice texture to it as well. So our first card, everything I think is on a plain white card base this month, and we've got You Are the Best, using that great heart hands die. I really like that. That is really unique and great fun to use. I die cut these hands from a medium tone of that Tim Holtz cardstock. I added a little bit of shading on the edges with just a brown gray Spectrum Noir alcohol marker. Brown grays is what I used. I thought that added a lot of dimension, a little more shape to these otherwise flat hands. I die cut those both, colored their edges with alcohol marker, and then I took a scrap of watercolor cardstock from my stash and colored this red that goes behind the hands here. I did use the pink liquid watercolor that came in the kit. And I found out fairly quickly that this works really nicely and blends quite nicely if you thin it down a little bit. Those liquid watercolors are so deeply pigmented that you put them down at their full strength and they're not going to move very much. But I think thinning them down a little and then doing 2 or 3 layers really helped. After I watercolored that, I cut it to size and then I went back in with another layer of that pink watercolor just to darken the edges a little bit. I stamped this sentiment. This is in intense black ink, and of course this is fruit punch ink. I just masked off each side of the stamp before I stamped them. That sentiment is embossed with some clear embossing powder. I attached the hands to the heart and attached those to the card front with some foam tape. Added a few little heart glitter pieces around the best. Really nice card. I love those hand dies. You are the best. Plain and simple, very straightforward card. It really showcases those hand heart dies. Or heart hands, what do we call them? Is there a term for that? Hand hearts? Is there a term? I love that hand die so much. I started fiddling around with the arrangement of the hands to see if we could get them to do something other than just make a heart. So for card number 2, we have Strength Lies in Differences. Now look at that. There's a different arrangement that actually works quite well. I didn't have to cut away any of the fingers or bend anything. They came together very nicely to make this 4-hand seat carry, which is an evacuation term. Usually these would only be 2 people carrying 1 person, but I decided to go ahead and make it 4 different colors of flesh tones on my little 4-hand carry seat. Those are 4 colors from that Tim Holtz pattern paper pack. I did shade the edges of those with more Spectrum Noir brown gray markers. I stamped this sentiment on the front of my plain white card base using some Distress Oxide Walnut Stain ink, and then I embossed that with some clear embossing powder. That's the only real shine on this card. Now the end of those hand dies do not cut. So you can either just lift these out of the paper, cut them out, or you can make their arms longer. So that's what I did here. I made all of these arms longer, arranged them together into this arrangement, glued the arms down to our card base, and then added thin foam tape behind the wrists on each one, and then behind the knuckles on each hand, just to give them a little bit of dimension, bring that a little bit more to life. I thought this 4-hand seat carry went perfectly with this sentiment. Strength lies in differences. There you go. It's not a heart, but it's a help. So we got that nice sun flare stencil in our kit. I wanted to see if I could make that work with the hand heart dies. So for our next card on a white card base, we have Thank You for Being You, with a combination of that sun flare stencil and our hand heart dies. Now I find with stencils, especially stencils with these long thin pieces, it's really useful to put some adhesive on the back of that. Pixie Spray stencil adhesive is kind of the new thing. I don't have any in my stash, but oftentimes I'll use a Zig 2-way glue pen to add glue to the back of a stencil, let that dry, and then that makes it very tacky. Make sure your stencil's nice and clean before you start adding the glue to it, but the Zig 2-way glue will often work very well to provide some temporary stick on the back of your stencils. So that's what I did, and I put my stencil down on a panel of white cardstock. I ink blended our little rainbow here. This, of course, is Hero Hues, Blue Hawaii, Green Apple, Lemon Drop, Creamsicle, and Fruit Punch reactive inks. I did mask off 3 of the little panels on each side so that we had more of a sense of that rainbow coming out from the hands. Die cut the hands for more of that Tim Holtz paper. I did give a little more shading on the edges with my alcohol markers, and then I dug out some of that great lava mirror cardstock. That was from the August of 2019 kit. I still have some of that laying around. Cut a piece of that to fit inside my hands there. That camouflaged the very end of that stencil as well. Glued those pieces on top of my inking. I cut that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4, added a thin purple mat to that, and then glued those down to my white card base. I stamped the sentiment here using grape slush reactive ink, and I did emboss that with some clear embossing powder. Really pretty card. I oftentimes don't use enough ink when I'm doing my ink blending, especially over a large area. I tell you, the more ink you use, the better, but I don't know what keeps me from just soaking my paper with ink. I don't know. My frugal Midwestern nature. Thank you for being you. That's a great sentiment. Great thank you sentiment. Okay, it's time to tackle our big cling stamp and those liquid watercolors. Let's go for broke. Card number 4, and we have You Color My World, with a surprise world in the middle of that stamp. I stamped that cling stamp on some of the watercolor paper using Versamark ink. I embossed that with white embossing powder. That should help keep my little areas from bleeding into each other as I watercolor. My first impressions of these watercolors, I think, were very right. I had greater success using thinned down layers of the watercolor to get these colors. I did use the mixing guide to come up with my green, to come up with my orange. I thought that all worked so nicely. I really love this. I just took my time, turned on some music, and watercolored to my heart's content. Now, I knew I was going to put this world in the center here, so I didn't color the entire center of that stamp, but you can see some of that blue poking through on the little tips there. This earth is actually the Hero Arts. This is the From the Vault Earth wood block stamp. And I tried stamping that in one of our ombre stamp pads, but I didn't think that gave us very much definition. So I went ahead and stamped the earth on some Bristol smooth cardstock using intense black ink, and then I colored that with the same liquid watercolors from our set. I die cut that with a nesting circle die, and I also die cut a piece of white foam to go behind that to give us a little dimension on that. I cut my watercolor panel down to 4 inches by 5 1/4, glued that to a thin black mat, and then down to my white card base. I stamped this sentiment on a scrap of white cardstock with intense black ink, and then embossed that as well with some clear embossing powder. There you go, there we can see it. I die cut my sentiment with a decal edge die from my stash, glued my earth and foam to the center of the card, and then for a final touch, I added just a little bit of sparkle around the earth. I think you can see that there, using my Spectrum Noir sparkle pen. Just a little halo of sparkle around the earth gives us a little bit of shine to this really pretty watercolor card. You Color My World. I couldn't resist using one of my favorite world stamps from Hero Arts. So I decided to break out my old airbrush and see how these liquid watercolors worked going through my old airbrush. Card number 5, this is a Sending Love card with this beautiful airbrushed heart. That's just using the 3 colors of our watercolors. That's the pink, that's the yellow, that's the blue. Those are not the right names. This is indigo. This is pink. Oh, I got the pink right. And dandelion. And I love how the airbrush will create that orange and that green just from the blending of the colors going through an airbrush. I really like that. I did put my stencil down on a piece of Nina Solar White cardstock, airbrushed the colors onto that, took the stencil off, and then I die cut that panel with a Hero Arts nesting heart die. Came out quite nicely there. You can see that whole panel airbrushed. I started losing the sticky already. You can see there, I'm starting to lose those white lines. So sometimes you have to re-stick the back of your stencils. No surprise there. I added the heart with some foam tape on top of this square of some black tie glitter paper. Really nice and shiny there. Glued those down to my white card base. I stamped the sentiments using intense black ink, and this is the love from the I Love You sentiment, which I just masked off the I and the U through and stamped only the love. So we've got sending love. I didn't have room to use that great big love die, so I just substituted the love from the stamp, sending love. I do believe that sending sentiment was added to our stamp set just to go along with love. I thought this worked very well. Once I put this all together, I thought it was just a little plain, so I grabbed a Sukaniko Stardust gel pen and just traced one edge of those stencil lines with that gel pen. I thought that worked really nicely, gave us a nice little bit of interest with that stencil on that heart, a little bit more sparkle, sending love, lots of glitter, lots of sparkle. Love those colors. Now, I did do a couple of panels while I had my airbrush out, so we'll see more of those in just a little bit. So since I used that sending sentiment on this card without the love die cuts, I decided I needed to use those love die cuts. So here we go. We've got I love you card. Love, 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 love. Now, I die cut that love die from the Altenew Cherry Blossom Gradient cardstock set. I coveted these for a long time. They worked so perfectly for this. I just love that gradient. You know, I'm not a huge fan of pink, but I really love this gradient on this card. I die cut those 4 different colors of cardstock with the love die, and then I cut a dozen more loves from some plain white cardstock, stacked all of the letters up together. So each one of these letters has 3 layers of white and 1 colored layer on top. So they're nice and chunky, nice dimension on those. I stamped the I love you sentiment right in the middle of this card using Taffy Hero Hues reactive ink, and I did again emboss that with some clear embossing powder. There you go, you can see that there. Added a couple of red heart brads on the 2 sides of that. After I clipped off their prongs, I just glued them down. I love you. Love, love, love. Boom, 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 love, love, love. Great Valentine card. I really like all of the dimension. I love this ombre effect that Altenew cardstock gives us. So I was wondering if there might be another way to use that intersecting circle cling stamp without having to color the entire thing. This is what I came up with for this card. And we have You Color Me Happy with flowers from that cling stamp on one of the watercolor paper pieces from our kit. I stamped just the center of our cling stamp 3 times. Now, I used a Hero Arts intensified black ink cube, and that gives you some great control, especially when you're stamping on a stamp. I was able to just stamp basically the circle. If I got over the ends of the lines, I was able to wipe the end of that off. Just some selective inking on our stamps. I stamped that 3 times on my watercolor paper. I did emboss all those black lines with some clear embossing powder, and then I dug in with my liquid watercolors and colored these all up. Again, though it doesn't look like a rainbow card, this is our rainbow again: purple, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. Instead of painting the background, I just fussy cut those flowers from our watercolor paper. I glued those down to a 3 3/4 inch by 5 inch panel of more of that black glitter cardstock. And then I stamped my sentiment on a scrap of white cardstock with intense black ink. I did again emboss that with some clear embossing powder, die cut that with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die. I glued my glitter paper down to my card front, glued my watercolor paper on top of that, added my sentiment with some foam tape. You Color Me Happy. I did add some Spectrum Noir sparkle pen to the center of those flowers. Can you see that sparkle there? I think you can. So all of the center parts have a little bit of glitter sparkle. That matches that black tie glitter paper very nicely. I love this sentiment quite a bit. This will get a lot of use over the years. And I love those flowers created with the cling stamp. You can just color me happy with this card. Now, I said I had airbrushed a couple more panels using that stencil and our liquid watercolors. So let's use those up. This is our next card. We've got You Are Vibrant. I have to tell you, this sentiment kind of threw me for a loop. I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. So I took one of my airbrushed panels. Again, that's airbrushed on some Nina Solar White cardstock with the stencil. Of course, my stencil was losing its stick by that time. You can see it's already losing it here. By the time I had done my second panel, I was starting to lose more of the stick. So some of my lines were a little bit fuzzy after the airbrushing. So I added some Love from Lizzie white peel-offs to go over all of those white lines on our stencil. That camouflaged any of the overspray, added some really nice shine to this, and those little plastic peel-offs have enough give to them that they follow the curve very nicely. I was very pleased with how that worked. These are some peel-offs from Love from Lizzie, just peel-off stickers. These are her straight white ones. Loved that. I was so pleased with how well that worked. I still had some of that purple lava mirror cardstock on my desk, so I wondered how it would take ink. So I stamped this sentiment on some of that purple cardstock with Versamark ink and then embossed that with white embossing powder. You can see it's got some nice shine there. I love that purple lava, and I still have one whole sheet of it left. I die cut my airbrush panel with a Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die, added a plain glitter black mat to that, glued that down to my card front. I die cut my little sentiment here using one of the Hero Arts tag frame infinity dies. Thought that fit that sentiment quite nicely. I glued that down to my card front with some foam tape, added a few purple glitter enamel dots from my stash just for a little extra sparkle, a little extra shine. You are vibrant. Okay, one more airbrushed card panel to use, and we have All Colors Are Beautiful. This card makes me very, very happy. I really like this sentiment, especially when you confuse the issue a little bit so that it's not just about the colors of our skin, but it's the colors of the rainbow. So all colors are beautiful, whether it's dark brown, light brown, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. I stamped that sentiment using intense black ink on the bottom of our panel here, and I did emboss that with some clear embossing powder. And then I took those Love from Lizzie peel-offs again and covered over all of our white lines on that airbrush panel. I did trim around the sentiment here. I didn't think I could stamp on top of the peel-offs, so I did the sentiment first, then added the peel-offs, and then just trimmed it off around the sentiment there. I die cut 3 sets of our heart hand dies in 3 different colors from my Tim Holtz card pack, glued those right down to the card base. I didn't think I needed anything behind the openings of the hands. Everything just fit on this card perfectly. That panel and everything is glued down to a white card base. All colors are beautiful. That stencil works just as well sideways as it does vertically. I love those heart hand dies. It's so fun, and I'm sure they'll get a lot of use over the years. I have one more sentiment from our stamp set left to use. Now, I seriously considered making this a light up card, but I thought of something a little different that might work just as well. For card number 10, we have a gatefold card. Your light shines through, and the hands split apart to show us a nice glittery, glittery yellow heart in the center there. Your light shines through. Though this card appears fairly simple, it was a bit of a bear to lay it out. I made this gatefold card just taking 8.5 by 5.5, score both sides at 2 1/8. They fold together to make a perfect gatefold card. I thought that was a great way to use those heart hand dies. I ink blended some lemon drop reactive ink on the front of this card using a sunburst stencil of my own, just lightly around where I thought the heart would be. I dug around in my Hero Arts nesting heart dies and figured that this was the heart that was closest to the size of our hands, and I die cut that through the front panels of our gatefold card. And then I also die cut that from a couple pieces of yellow cardstock, added some Spectrum Noir sparkle pen to that for some nice sparkle. I glued that directly in the opening on the inside of the card and traced around that with my Sakura Stardust gel pen again. Works very nicely, and that definitely shines through. Is that too literal? Your light shines through. I stamped that. What's that? I got a little goober here. There you go. Okay, that's clean. Whew, scares me when I see that. I stamped this sentiment on the front panels just right across that seam. I got that seam nice and tight, so I thought I could stamp that right on top of that. I stamped that again with intense black ink, and of course I did emboss that with some clear embossing powder. Die cut the hands from another piece of that Tim Holtz cardstock, gave them some dimension with a little alcohol marker on their ends, glued them down right over that heart die cut, and that's our final card. Your light shines through, a fun little gatefold card. I love seeing those hands come apart and then come back together. So much fun. Though I was a little concerned at how to make 10 different cards with this kit at the beginning, I found that just using all of the sentiments in the stamp set made it fairly easy for me to come up with 10 different cards. I think these sentiments and some of the images I came up with actually works very, very well. All colors are beautiful. I thought that worked really great. That's my 10 cards this month. It's certainly a very colorful batch of cards. And this is truly a very unique kit. I love the heart hand dies. I just love that so much. And the liquid watercolors are so highly pigmented and quite fun to play with. I admit I had a blast using my airbrush, and it worked so well with these liquid watercolors. I'm sure I will use that method again in the future. That airbrush made these rainbow gradients quick and fairly easy. Makes a little bit of a mess, of course. Now, I was so focused on using all of the sentiments in the stamp set that I seem to have forgotten the heart. There's a heart right there that I completely forgot about. So I didn't cover every single stamp in this stamp set. I thought about adding a heart to the middle of these or this or that or that. Oh well, I almost used all of the stamps in our stamp set this month. I do think this month's kit is filled with items that'll get a lot of use in the future. Leave it to Hero Arts to surprise us with a kit that really encourages us to think outside of the same old card kit. Now, this kit is still available at Hero Arts. If I caught your eye with these or given you some ideas of your own, please use my links in the description down below when you go shopping with Hero Arts. It is supremely appreciated and helps keep this page and me alive. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here. I hope I was able to inspire you to ever greater crafting joy. Please take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones. I'm back to work full time now, but things still feel tenuous. So please take care of yourself. Get vaccinated if you haven't already. Remember to like me, list me, pin me, post me, share me with all of your friends. Don't run with scissors. And I wish you and yours energy, strength, love, and contentment. And as always, happy crafting. For more detailed information, better pictures, and product links, please visit my website at cardcutups.com.